They say immortality is a gift, but no one ever tells you what 400 years of silence can do to a heart. Claire Bennett checked her watch for the third time in less than a minute as she hurried across the polished marble lobby of Blackstone Tower. It was 10:47 p.m., nearly 2 hours after her shift was supposed to end, and the cleaning contractor had just called to say another employee had gone home sick. That meant one more floor to inspect before she could catch the last subway home. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the spotless floor while a janitor's cart rattled behind her. She rubbed the ache from her shoulders and reminded herself that overtime meant another $43 before taxes. $43 could keep the electricity on for another week. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime. She pushed her cart inside, only to realize someone else stepped in at the last second. The man wore a perfectly tailored black suit that looked expensive enough to pay her rent for years. His dark hair was neatly combed, his pale face almost unreal beneath the soft ceiling lights, and his gray eyes remained fixed on the closing doors as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Claire offered the kind of polite smile that service workers gave strangers every day. "Long night?" she asked. The man barely nodded. "Long century," he answered quietly. Claire laughed, assuming it was dry humor. "Feels that way sometimes." He didn't smile back. The elevator began climbing smoothly past the 20th floor. 25. 31. 39. Then everything stopped. The lights flickered once. The gentle hum disappeared. A sharp silence settled inside the metal box. Claire instinctively grabbed the rail before the emergency brakes locked into place with a heavy clunk. She pressed the alarm button. Nothing happened except a weak red light blinking overhead. She reached for her phone. No signal. "Seriously," she sighed. "Of all nights." The man remained perfectly still, but something about him changed. His breathing became slower, too controlled. His fingers tightened around the leather briefcase until the seams creaked. His eyes never left the elevator doors. Claire noticed the color draining from his already pale face. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked gently. "I'm fine." His voice was calm, almost emotionless. Then another second passed. "No," he admitted. "I'm not." Claire frowned. She had expected irritation, maybe anger, but not honesty. "Claustrophobic," she guessed. He closed his eyes. "Something like that." The emergency lights dimmed, bathing the elevator in a soft amber glow. Outside there was only silence. No footsteps. No maintenance crew. No comforting mechanical sounds. Just two strangers suspended somewhere between the 68th and 69th floors. Claire sat carefully against one wall and placed her cleaning gloves beside her. "Looks like we're going to be here for a while." The man remained standing. Every muscle in his body looked tense, as though invisible chains held him upright. She patted the empty space across from her. "Standing won't make the elevator move faster." He hesitated before finally sitting down, leaving several feet between them. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Claire hated awkward silence. It reminded her too much of empty apartments and unpaid bills. "You know," she said softly, "my grandma always claimed people tell the truth when they're stuck somewhere they can't escape." For the first time, the stranger looked directly at her. His gray eyes carried a sadness so old it almost felt impossible. "Your grandmother was wiser than most kings," he whispered. Claire smiled without realizing that those simple words had landed somewhere deep inside him. She had no way of knowing that no one had spoken to him like an ordinary man in over 400 years. Claire leaned her head back against the cool metal wall and listened for any sign that help was coming. But the building felt strangely empty, as though the entire tower had forgotten they existed. She looked across the narrow elevator and noticed the man had not relaxed at all. His shoulders remained perfectly straight, yet his hands betrayed him. His fingers trembled almost imperceptibly before he folded them together, hiding the movement with practiced precision. "You know," Claire said quietly, "most people would be yelling at the emergency phone by now." His expression barely changed. "I have learned that shouting rarely changes fate." She tilted her head. "That sounds like something my grandfather used to say." A faint breath escaped him. It almost resembled a laugh, although it carried no joy. "Your family seems to possess remarkable wisdom." Claire shrugged. Mostly they just survived hard times. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt lighter. She reached into her lunch bag and pulled out a slightly crushed turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper along with a bottle of water that had already become lukewarm. I was saving this for the train ride home, but I do not think either of us knows how long we are going to be here. She held the sandwich toward him. Would you like half? He stared at it as though it were something completely unfamiliar. I do not eat much. That is a polite way of saying no. It is the truthful way. Claire smiled and tore the sandwich into 2 uneven pieces anyway. Well, if you change your mind, it will still be here. She took a bite while watching the dim emergency light cast soft shadows across the elevator walls. Can I ask you something? He nodded once. What is the saddest thing you have ever lost? The question surprised even her. She had not planned to ask it. It had simply slipped out into the silence. The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the ceiling as though searching through memories stored somewhere above the steel and concrete. Nearly a full minute passed before he finally spoke. Time. Claire blinked. Time. Everyone believes time heals grief. They are mistaken. Time simply teaches you how to carry it. His voice remained calm, but every word felt unbearably heavy. You lose enough years. Eventually you stop remembering what happiness sounded like. Claire lowered the sandwich without realizing it. That is kind of heartbreaking. He gave a small nod. It should be. She studied him carefully. He could not have been older than 35, yet he spoke like someone who had watched civilizations rise and disappear. Did you lose someone? She asked gently. His eyes remained fixed on the floor. Many. Another pause. Too many to count. The elevator seemed even quieter now. Claire found herself lowering her voice without meaning to. I lost my dad when I was 14. Sometimes I still catch myself wanting to call him after a bad day. The stranger looked at her for the first time in several minutes. His gray eyes softened almost imperceptibly. You still speak of him in the present tense. She smiled sadly. I guess some people never really leave. His gaze drifted away again. No, he whispered. They do not. Somewhere above them a dull metallic sound echoed through the shaft. Claire sat up hopefully. Did you hear that? He nodded. Someone is searching. Relief crossed her face, but his expression darkened instead. She noticed immediately. You do not seem happy about that. He closed his eyes for only a moment. Because eventually every prison opens. She laughed softly. That is one way to describe an elevator. He looked at her again, and for the briefest instant something ancient flickered behind those pale gray eyes. I was not talking about the elevator. Before Claire could ask what he meant, the lights flickered once more, and somewhere far above them, unseen gears slowly began to turn. The slow grinding sound above them grew louder before fading away again, leaving only disappointment behind. Claire let out a long breath and rested her elbows on her knees. False alarm, she murmured. Figures. The stranger did not respond immediately. He listened with unusual focus, as though he could hear things beyond the walls that she never could. Finally he said, They are trying several override systems. None of them are working. Claire looked at him curiously. You sound awfully confident. He answered without thinking. Because I know how this building was designed. She raised an eyebrow. You helped build it? For the first time since they had become trapped, he hesitated. Something like that. Claire accepted the vague answer. Everyone had secrets. Hers were simply smaller. She leaned back once more. You know what I do when everything falls apart? He looked toward her. I bake. His expression revealed genuine confusion. Bake. Cookies. Bread. Cinnamon rolls. Whatever is cheap enough to make. She smiled faintly. When life gets messy, measuring flour somehow makes everything feel organized again. The corner of his mouth moved almost imperceptibly. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough for Claire to notice. That is an unusual philosophy. It keeps me sane. Another quiet moment passed before she asked, What do you do when life falls apart? His gaze settled on the elevator doors. I rebuild kingdoms. Claire laughed out loud. Okay, that wins. Definitely more dramatic than cookies. He did not laugh with her. Instead he whispered, almost to himself, "It becomes exhausting after the 4th century." Claire looked at him again. The joke should have sounded ridiculous, but somehow it did not. His face carried a weariness that no sleepless week could explain. "Can I ask you something a little personal?" she said carefully. He nodded. "Have you ever been in love?" The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it. Even the emergency lights seemed dimmer. Finally he answered. "Once." His voice was softer now. "She believed I could become someone better than the man the world feared." Claire smiled gently. "She sounds pretty amazing." She was. He swallowed slowly. She planted roses outside a castle where nothing had grown for decades. She insisted that every lonely place deserved something beautiful. Claire pictured the scene without understanding why it felt so vivid. "What happened?" she asked quietly. His eyes never left the floor. "Time happened." Claire frowned. "You really hate time." "No." He slowly shook his head. "I hate surviving it." Those 4 words settled inside the elevator like invisible snow. Claire did not know what to say. She had never heard grief described so simply. She reached into her lunch bag again and pulled out a small packet of chocolate chip cookies. "My grandmother always kept emergency cookies for terrible days." She held one toward him with a playful smile. "Maybe tonight qualifies." He stared at the cookie for several seconds before accepting it between careful fingers. "Thank you." Claire grinned. "There we go. Progress." He examined the cookie as though it belonged in a museum. Then, surprisingly, he took a small bite. His expression remained unreadable, but after swallowing he quietly said, "I had forgotten this taste." Claire blinked. "Forgotten chocolate?" He looked almost embarrassed. "It has been a very long time." She laughed warmly. "Well, welcome back." Somewhere beyond the elevator walls, a distant voice echoed through the shaft, followed by hurried footsteps. Claire immediately stood. "Hello," she called. "We are in here." This time someone answered. "Please remain calm. We are working to restore power." Relief spread across her face. She turned toward the stranger, expecting him to share it, but instead she found him staring silently at the half-eaten cookie in his hand. His expression carried something she had not seen before. Hope. Fragile. Uncertain. As though one ordinary act of kindness had awakened a memory he had spent centuries trying to bury. The voice outside faded again, replaced by the low mechanical hum of equipment somewhere above them. Claire let out a disappointed sigh before sitting back down on the elevator floor. "Looks like we are still roommates for a little while," she joked. This time the stranger answered with something that almost resembled amusement. "An unusual arrangement. I have had worse." She folded her legs beneath her and studied him for a moment. The severe expression that had greeted her when the doors first closed had softened. The sharp edges remained, but the loneliness behind them was becoming impossible to ignore. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "You already have." She smiled. "Fair point. Well, I think you carry too much by yourself." He lowered his eyes. "That has been my duty." "Maybe." She shrugged. "But duty is not supposed to erase the person carrying it." Those words lingered in the air. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly removed one leather glove and stared at his bare hand. His skin was almost impossibly pale beneath the amber emergency light, marked only by a simple silver ring that looked centuries older than anything sold in modern jewelry stores. He gently turned it with his thumb, as though touching an old memory. "412 years ago," he said quietly, "I believe strength meant never allowing anyone to see you grieve." Claire remained silent. She sensed this was the first time he had willingly opened that particular door. "Every generation expected certainty from me. Every council demanded perfection. Every family believed I could protect them from every loss." His voice stayed calm, but each sentence carried the weight of countless unspoken nights. "Eventually, I stopped speaking about my own." Claire watched him carefully. "Because nobody asked?" He looked up. His gray eyes reflected the dim light like winter clouds. "Because after enough years, they stopped seeing the man." He paused. "They only saw the throne." Claire felt an unexpected ache settle in her chest. She had spent years feeling invisible because people overlooked her. Somehow this stranger had spent centuries feeling invisible because everyone saw only his position. Different lives. The same loneliness. That sounds exhausting, she whispered. He nodded once. It is. Silence returned, but it no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt honest. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a faded photograph folded along the edges. This is my mom. She unfolded it carefully. She still works 2 jobs. The stranger accepted the photograph with remarkable care, as though it were something priceless. She looks kind. She is. Claire smiled. She always says people need someone who listens more than someone who solves everything. He continued studying the picture before handing it back. Your mother is wiser than many rulers I have known. Claire laughed softly. You really know a lot of rulers, huh? For just a fraction of a second, something dangerous almost slipped into his expression before disappearing again. More than I ever wished to. A loud metallic click echoed above them. The elevator suddenly shuddered. Claire instinctively reached for the nearest support, but the unexpected movement threw her slightly off balance. Before she could react, the stranger caught her wrist with extraordinary speed. His grip was firm but remarkably gentle. Careful, he said quietly. Their eyes met for only a moment. Claire noticed how strangely cool his hand felt, yet somehow comforting rather than alarming. He released her immediately, almost as if afraid he had crossed a line. Sorry, he murmured. No, Claire replied with a grateful smile. Thank you. The elevator settled again, returning to stillness. Then, for the first time that night, bright white lights suddenly flooded the cabin. The emergency bulb switched off. The ventilation system roared back to life. Claire smiled with relief. Looks like they finally fixed it. But the stranger did not smile. He stared silently at the illuminated floor numbers above the door, as though the return of power signaled something far more complicated than freedom. Outside, footsteps approached rapidly. Not 1 pair. Not 2. Dozens. Perfectly synchronized. Claire frowned. That seems like an awful lot of people for one stuck elevator. The elevator gave one final jolt before the doors slid apart with a slow metallic whisper. Claire blinked against the bright hallway lights. For a heartbeat she expected to see one maintenance worker holding a toolbox. Instead she found an entire corridor filled with people in identical black suits standing in 2 perfectly straight lines. Every face was calm. Every posture was rigid. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the man beside her. No one looked at Claire. Not even once. The silence was so complete that she could hear the soft hum of the ceiling lights. Then, as though responding to an invisible signal, every person lowered their head at exactly the same moment. Your Majesty, they said together. The words echoed down the marble hallway. Claire froze. She looked left. She looked right. Then she slowly turned toward the stranger sitting beside her. He closed his eyes briefly before standing with quiet resignation. His posture changed the instant he stepped out of the elevator. The loneliness that had filled the small metal room disappeared behind an expression of absolute composure. He did not become colder. He simply became untouchable. One older man with silver hair stepped forward. Your Majesty, we deeply apologize. The emergency response teams arrived within 4 minutes, but every backup system failed simultaneously. The investigation has already begun. The stranger answered with calm authority. No investigation tonight. But, Your Majesty, that was not a request. The older man immediately bowed his head. Yes, Your Majesty. Claire stared in complete disbelief. Her thoughts raced so quickly that none of them made sense. King. Majesty. For 100 years. Kingdoms. Suddenly every strange answer, every impossible sentence, every look in his ancient gray eyes crashed together like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their place. She whispered almost to herself, You were serious. He slowly turned toward her. For the first time since the elevator doors had opened, the people surrounding them finally noticed the young cleaning employee standing beside him. Several exchanged subtle glances. Others looked openly confused. None of them spoke. The stranger's voice softened. I was. Claire could only stare. You are. He finished the sentence for her. Darius Ashford. The name meant nothing to her until she noticed the expressions on everyone else's faces. Respect. Loyalty. Fear. Emotions so strong they almost filled the hallway. She remembered magazine covers featuring the mysterious billionaire, who rarely appeared in public. She remembered documentaries filled with rumors about impossible business victories that stretched back farther than anyone could reasonably explain. She remembered stories describing Blackstone Tower as one of the most secure private buildings in America. She had laughed at those conspiracy theories. Now they did not seem funny anymore. "You own this building," she whispered. A faint smile crossed his face. "Among other responsibilities." Before Claire could ask another question, another suited man approached carrying a long black coat. Darius accepted it without taking his eyes off her. "Miss Bennett," he said quietly. She blinked. "You know my name? I knew it the moment you signed in for your shift this evening." Her heart skipped. "You knew who I was the whole time?" He nodded once. "Yes." Claire laughed nervously, still trying to process everything. "Well, that feels slightly unfair." Something unexpected happened. Darius actually smiled. It was small, brief, almost fragile. But everyone standing nearby reacted as though they had witnessed something impossible. The silver-haired advisor looked visibly stunned before lowering his gaze again. Claire noticed the reaction immediately. She looked back at Darius. "What?" He seemed almost confused. "What do you mean? Everybody keeps staring every time you smile." He glanced toward his advisors, who instantly looked away. Then he answered with quiet honesty. "Because I rarely do." Claire tilted her head. "Maybe you should do it more often." The hallway became completely silent once again. Not because anyone had been ordered to remain quiet, but because no one could remember the last time someone had spoken to their king as though he were simply another human being. And for reasons Darius himself could not explain, those simple words reached deeper into his immortal heart than any speech he had heard in 4 centuries. Claire stood in the middle of the marble hallway, still holding her worn lunch bag while everyone around her behaved as though the entire world had stopped turning. She looked down at her cleaning gloves, then back at the rows of perfectly dressed men and women waiting for instructions from the quiet stranger she had shared cookies with less than an hour earlier. "This is unreal," she whispered. Darius heard her despite the distance between them. Of course he did. He heard everything. For centuries he had heard whispered conspiracies, desperate prayers, declarations of loyalty, and promises that dissolved with time. Yet those 3 simple words somehow echoed louder than all of them. The silver-haired advisor stepped beside him. "Your Majesty, the Council has already requested an emergency meeting. They wish to understand why every security protocol failed simultaneously." Darius answered without looking away from Claire. "They may wait until tomorrow. They will not appreciate the delay. Neither will I." The advisor lowered his head immediately. "Understood." Claire cleared her throat awkwardly. "I should probably get back to work." Every head in the hallway turned toward her again. Darius looked almost surprised by her answer. "Back to work? Somebody still has to finish cleaning the 72nd floor." A few of the advisors exchanged bewildered glances. One younger guard actually looked offended on the king's behalf, as though ordinary cleaning had suddenly become the most important issue in the building. Darius remained silent for several seconds before asking, "After everything you have learned tonight, that is your first concern?" Claire shrugged with an embarrassed smile. "Bills do not really care whether someone is a king." A quiet murmur traveled through the assembled staff. Darius slowly nodded. "No, they rarely do." His expression softened again. "You have reminded me of something I forgot long ago." Claire tilted her head. "What is that?" "The world continues moving, even when someone believes their own burdens are the center of it." She smiled warmly. "My mom says something similar. She always tells me that tomorrow morning still shows up whether we are ready or not." Darius looked away for a moment, absorbing the words as though committing them to memory. One of the security officers hurried toward the group carrying a tablet. "Your Majesty, every camera recording from Elevator 12 has been secured." Claire frowned. "Why would you need the security video?" The officer immediately became uncomfortable and looked toward Darius for permission to answer. Darius spoke first. Because everything inside this building is recorded. Claire laughed softly. Wonderful. Somewhere there is footage of me offering a billionaire half of a squished sandwich. Not a billionaire, the silver-haired advisor corrected automatically. Darius raised one hand, stopping him before he continued. Claire noticed the brief exchange. Did he almost say something else? Darius answered calmly. Yes. Should I ask? Not tonight. She accepted that answer more easily than she expected. Perhaps after everything else, another mystery no longer seemed impossible. Darius stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. The guards instinctively moved as well before stopping at a subtle glance from their king. Claire noticed how everyone seemed to anticipate his thoughts before he spoke. It felt less like discipline and more like long habit. Miss Bennet, Darius said quietly. Thank you. She blinked. For what? For listening. The sincerity in his voice erased every trace of authority. For one brief moment he sounded exactly like the lonely man trapped inside the elevator rather than the ruler standing before dozens of loyal attendants. Claire smiled gently. Everybody deserves someone who listens. His gray eyes remained fixed on hers. That belief has become very rare. She adjusted the strap on her lunch bag and started walking backward toward the employee hallway. Well, try smiling a little more. And maybe eat another cookie once in a while. Darius watched her leave without saying another word. Around him, no one dared interrupt the silence. They had witnessed meetings between kings and presidents, negotiations worth billions of dollars, and ceremonies that shaped nations. Yet none of those moments looked anything like the simple conversation they had just seen. As Claire disappeared around the corner, Darius quietly reached into his coat pocket. Hidden beside centuries-old documents and polished silver keys, rested the last half of an ordinary chocolate chip cookie. He looked at it for a long moment before closing his hand around it, realizing that for the first time in more than 400 years, he did not dread tomorrow. Claire finished the last hallway on the 72nd floor just after midnight, but her hands moved almost automatically while her thoughts remained trapped inside elevator 12. Every polished window reflected the same impossible memory. A lonely man speaking about 4 centuries as though they had happened yesterday. A king accepting half of an ordinary sandwich. A smile that seemed to surprise everyone except the woman who had accidentally caused it. By the time she returned her cleaning cart to the supply room, she had convinced herself she must have imagined half the evening. People did not simply discover that the mysterious owner of the tallest building in the city had been quietly carrying centuries of grief. She signed out at the security desk, wished the night guard a good evening, and stepped into the cool autumn air. Across the street, Blackstone Tower rose into the clouds, every illuminated floor reflecting against the glass like countless stars trapped inside a single building. Claire looked up for a few seconds before shaking her head with a small laugh. What a strange day, she whispered. She disappeared into the subway entrance without noticing the dark sedan parked quietly across the street. Inside the vehicle, the silver-haired advisor sat beside Darius in complete silence. Neither man spoke until Claire's train had departed. Finally the advisor cleared his throat. Your Majesty, shall I order our usual security observation? Darius kept watching the empty sidewalk. No. The advisor looked surprised. No protection? Protection. Darius answered calmly. Not surveillance. The older man nodded slowly, recognizing the difference immediately. Understood. The car began moving through the sleeping city. Rain from earlier still glistened across the pavement, while reflections of traffic lights drifted beneath the tires like ribbons of colored glass. Darius leaned his head against the window. 400 years had taught him to remember every face that entered his life. Most disappeared within decades, some within days. Very few ever reached his heart. Yet somehow a cleaning employee with tired sneakers and homemade cookies had accomplished something countless rulers, scholars, and advisors had failed to do. She had spoken to him without fear, without ambition, without expecting anything in return. At the royal residence hidden behind centuries-old stone walls, servants quietly opened enormous iron gates before the sedan reached them. Every light inside the estate remained on, despite the late hour. Darius entered the grand library instead of the council chamber waiting for him. Shelves filled with handwritten journals stretched from floor to ceiling. 400 years of history rested inside those leather bindings. Kingdoms, treaties, losses, victories, entire generations preserved in careful handwriting. He removed his coat and reached into the inside pocket. The small piece of chocolate chip cookie remained exactly where he had placed it. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it carefully beside an old leather journal dated 1823. The advisor entered quietly a few minutes later. "Your Majesty, the council has assembled." Darius did not move. "Let them wait. This is the third time tonight. Then they are becoming patient." The advisor almost smiled before returning to business. "There is one additional matter." Darius finally looked up. "Speak." Several council members reviewed the elevator security recordings. The room grew still. "And they believe Miss Bennet now possesses knowledge no ordinary human should have." Darius remained expressionless. "She knows only that I listened." Some will argue that is precisely the problem. Silence settled over the library once again. Outside, wind moved gently through the ancient oak trees surrounding the estate. Darius walked toward one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens where hundreds of white roses bloomed beneath the moonlight. He remembered another night centuries earlier, when someone had insisted lonely places deserved something beautiful. Tonight another ordinary woman had unknowingly repeated the lesson in a different form. People deserved someone who listened. He closed his eyes briefly before giving his answer. "If the council wishes to discuss Claire Bennet," he said quietly, "they will do so in my presence." The advisor bowed immediately, but deep inside he understood something historic had already begun. For the first time in centuries, their immortal king was no longer protecting only a kingdom. He was preparing to protect a single ordinary human, who had reminded him what it felt like to simply be heard. Morning sunlight poured through the small kitchen window of Claire Bennet's apartment, painting warm stripes across the worn wooden table where she and her mother shared breakfast before another busy day. Nothing about the tiny apartment suggested that the previous night had changed anything. Bills still waited beneath a coffee mug. The refrigerator still made its familiar rattling sound every few minutes. The landlord still expected rent by Friday. Claire spread strawberry jam across a piece of toast while her mother watched her with quiet curiosity. "You have that look," her mother said. Claire looked up. "What look?" "The one you get whenever something strange happens, and you are deciding whether anyone would believe you." Claire laughed nervously. "It was just a weird night at work." "Weird enough that you have stirred your coffee 6 times without taking a sip." Claire looked down and smiled sheepishly. "Maybe." She considered explaining everything, but the story sounded impossible even inside her own head. Instead she simply said, "I met someone who seemed incredibly lonely." Her mother nodded with gentle understanding. "The loneliest people often hide behind the biggest responsibilities." Claire smiled. "That sounds exactly like something he would say." Several miles away, beneath vaulted stone ceilings untouched by time, the council chamber echoed with measured voices. 12 elders sat around a circular table carved from black marble polished smooth through centuries of use. Darius remained standing near one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens. He had not taken his seat. He rarely did when difficult decisions were discussed. One elder folded his hands together. "Your Majesty, the matter is simple. The human employee has heard conversations that no outsider should hear." Another elder added calmly, "Knowledge creates vulnerability. Tradition exists for a reason." Darius remained silent. A third council member spoke with careful diplomacy. "No one questions your judgment. However, history has repeatedly demonstrated the danger of emotional attachments clouding royal decisions." Darius finally turned toward them. His expression remained composed, yet something in his eyes caused the entire room to become still. "Did Miss Bennet seek hidden knowledge?" "No." "Did she enter restricted areas?" "No." "Did she ask for power?" "No." Each answer came more quietly than the last. Darius folded his hands behind his back. "Then explain why the innocent should bear responsibility for circumstances she neither created nor understood." No one answered immediately. The oldest council member finally spoke. "Because history has always demanded difficult choices." Darius slowly shook his head. History also remembers who made them. Silence settled over the chamber once more. The elders understood the conversation had already shifted beyond simple policy. Meanwhile, Claire arrived at Blackstone Tower for another evening shift. The familiar lobby somehow felt completely different now. Every polished surface reminded her of the previous night. She expected to see Darius waiting near the elevators, but the entrance appeared perfectly ordinary. Employees hurried past carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Receptionists answered phones. Maintenance workers replaced ceiling lights. Life had returned to normal. Or at least it pretended to. As Claire signed the attendance log, the security supervisor approached with an unusually respectful smile. "Miss Bennett." She looked up in surprise. "Yes. Your employee access has been upgraded." "Upgraded? You may now use all executive elevators." Claire blinked. There has to be some mistake. The supervisor glanced at his computer before shaking his head. "No mistake." The authorization came directly from the chairman's office. Claire immediately knew who had approved it. She looked toward elevator 12 standing quietly across the lobby. Its polished doors reflected the passing crowd exactly as they had the night before. She walked closer almost without thinking. For a moment she simply stood there, remembering old stories, quiet confessions, forgotten cookies, and one fragile smile that had surprised an entire hallway. Then the elevator chimed softly. The doors opened by themselves. Inside rested a small white bakery box tied with a dark silver ribbon. No note. No signature. Only the warm scent of freshly baked cinnamon rolls drifting gently into the lobby. Claire smiled before she even realized she was smiling. Somewhere high above the city, behind the reflective glass of the executive floor, Darius stood alone beside his office window. He watched the lobby through a private security monitor, not because he wished to observe her every move, but because he hoped to see one simple thing. When Claire opened the bakery box and laughed with genuine surprise, the corners of his own mouth quietly lifted once again. This time, no one was there to witness it except the silent walls that had waited 400 years to see their king smile twice in 2 days. Claire carefully carried the bakery box upstairs as though it contained something far more valuable than cinnamon rolls. She shared one with the receptionist, another with the security guard who always worked the evening shift, and another with the maintenance technician who had spent half the previous night trying to restore elevator 12. "Someone must really appreciate the cleaning staff," the technician joked. Claire smiled without answering. She was beginning to understand that kindness did not always arrive with explanations. Late that evening, after finishing her final inspection, she found herself standing once again in front of elevator 12. The polished steel doors reflected her tired face along with the small smile she could no longer hide. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty hallway, unsure whether she was speaking to the elevator, the building, or the lonely king somewhere above the clouds. The doors opened almost immediately. This time there was no emergency. No flickering lights. No silence heavy with old memories. The cabin stood perfectly empty except for a small silver envelope resting on the floor. Claire looked around. The hallway was deserted. She bent down and picked it up. Inside rested a simple brass key attached to a smooth white tag. Written across the tag in elegant handwriting were only 12 words. "If the world ever becomes too heavy, press the top floor and bring this key." Claire read the sentence twice before quietly laughing to herself. That is either incredibly mysterious or incredibly impractical. She slipped the key into her pocket anyway. Hundreds of feet above her, Darius watched the elevator begin its descent from a private monitor before switching off the screen himself. He no longer wished to observe through cameras. Somehow that felt dishonest after everything they had shared. The silver-haired advisor entered the office carrying several documents. "Your Majesty, the council has accepted your ruling." Darius looked up. Accepted or surrendered? The advisor smiled politely. Perhaps a little of both. He placed the folders on the desk before hesitating. "May I ask one question?" "You may." "After 4 centuries, why does this human matter so much?" Darius remained quiet for several moments. Outside the office windows, thousands of city lights stretched toward the horizon like stars scattered across the earth. Finally he answered. "Because she did something no council, no ruler, and no ally has done in longer than I can remember." The advisor waited. She reminded me that I was never meant to carry eternity alone. The older man lowered his head with quiet respect. He had served 3 generations of immortal rulers, yet he had never heard words quite like those. Across the city, Claire arrived home just before midnight. Her mother was asleep on the couch with a book resting across her lap. Claire gently covered her with a blanket before sitting beside the window overlooking the quiet street below. She removed the brass key from her pocket and turned it slowly between her fingers. It looked ordinary, plain, yet somehow it felt connected to a door that had remained closed for centuries. She smiled as she remembered one particular moment inside the elevator. Maybe you should smile more often. She wondered whether he actually would. The following morning, employees throughout Blackstone Tower noticed something unusual. The chairman walked through the lobby instead of using his private entrance. He greeted the receptionist by name, thanked the security guard for working the overnight shift, paused to compliment the maintenance crew on repairing elevator 12. The entire building buzzed with quiet confusion. No one understood what had changed. Only one elderly advisor, watching from a respectful distance, recognized the answer. Sometimes the greatest miracles were not ancient magic, impossible wealth, or centuries of power. Sometimes they were as simple as one ordinary person choosing to listen when everyone else had stopped asking. And somewhere between the 68th and 69th floors, an elevator that had once trapped 2 strangers had quietly become the place where an immortal king remembered how to be human again.